Hi, everyone. Welcome to our mentorship roundtable, Archival Research for Your Documentary with Emily Harrold. My name is Chris Everett, and I am the program manager at the Southern Documentary Fund. The Southern Documentary Fund is a nonprofit that cultivates documentary media made in or about the American South. We believe that media has the power to change lives, and we provide makers with resources to champion Southern storytelling, serving as a leading advocate, providing filmmakers and artists with professional support, filmmaking grants, and fiscal sponsorship. Today, Emily will share her expertise on the art of archival research and the best resources for finding and organizing archival and third-party visual materials for your documentary. We also want to remind you that our annual Southern Documentary convening is May 19th through the 21st in downtown Durham, North Carolina. Passes are on sale now. The early bird special ends on March 8th, so get your passes today. We'll provide that link in the webinar chat box throughout our presentation today, so definitely sign up for the convening. This is going to be a hell of a time. This is our first time doing it since 2019. We're going to have a weekend of panels, screenings, workshops, networking events. We're going to have funders there, distributors, a whole bunch of folks throughout the South and throughout the country meeting for a weekend of just exploring all things documentary. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. And one last reminder, definitely put your questions in the Q&A chat box, put your Q&A questions in the chat box, and we'll get to those shortly. But now I'm going to hand it over to our mentor and our guest today, Emily Harrold.
Hey, everybody. I'm super excited to be here, and thanks, Chris and Dana, for organizing this. We are going to use a PowerPoint, so I do want to note the PowerPoint will be sent out after, so you don't need to rush to take notes. And I am going to zoom through this pretty quickly, so we want to make sure we have time for questions. So again, save your questions, put them in the chat box, and we will jump into those at the end of the PowerPoint. All right, so I'm just going to jump in. All right, so you all are here for archive research. So what is archival material? Broadly, it's any third-party material that you don't create yourself. There are some examples. Photographs, home movies, YouTube videos, social media posts, newspaper articles, historical film, news reports, and not music. That's a key. If you need a license to music, hire a music supervisor. All right, so where do you start? Well, first thing you need to think about is, what do you need? That's basically the key to getting started. And how much of your film is going to be archival? So is your film 100% archival? Is it 75% archival? Is it just one teeny little section? How much time do you have for archive research? That's also something you want to think about. Are you giving yourself months and months? Are you giving yourself just a week? And how much money do you have to spend on duplication and licensing? Because archival does cost money. So some golden rules first of things you should not do. Don't start your edit the same time you start all of your research. Especially if you're doing a project that's largely archival, because you really want to build in time for that research. And it's really not fun to be trying to edit and look for stuff all at the same time. It's just usually a recipe for disaster. And don't rip stuff from online and then forget where it's from. You want to make sure you save your links, and we're going to talk about how to do that in a little bit. And here is a GIF that I found that if these two golden rules don't go well, it's going to be a mess. So these are the two big things to just never forget. Okay, so another thing you want to think about is the type of materials you need. And there are some cool archival places to look for things. So these are kind of a breakdown. There's B-roll, photos, historic stuff, news, public domain stuff, which as of 2023 is anything published before 1928, fair use materials, local materials. So again, in thinking about what you need, you want to kind of also identify what are these kinds of materials that you need. And then a thing that you'll also want to think about are the types of collections where you're going to go to look for these things. And here are some wonderful search tools. They're all online. So they're commercial archives, which are more of the places that you're going to spend most of the money. Local archives are also really great. These are like the historical societies, small collections that, you know, are local history. University archives, those are also really, really great. And you can find a lot of stuff there. A lot of it is offline, so you have to go in person. News outlets, they have a lot of really great stuff too. Government collections, and there are federal, state, and local versions of government collections. Private collections, like people's basements. And then online collections. And I'll also say that some of these can overlap. So all of these that you see on the screen are online collections, but they're some of, like the top one, the Library of Congress, is also a federal government collection. So let's talk a little bit about commercial archives and present day B-roll specifically. So if you know that you need footage of a specific city or a specific town, there are some specific archives that are going to be able to help you there, and they're mostly going to be commercial archives. So for footage and stills, that also separates the kind of places that you're going to be looking. Footage, some of the ones that are you may even know already: Getty, which also has stills; Pond 5 also has stills; Shutterstock, Film Supply, Bloomberg. These are places where you can log in online, find what you need, basically download it, pay for it, and use it pretty quickly. The same with stills, and here are some of the stills archives: Alame, Granger, AP, Reuters, Redux, which is the New York Times archive. So a lot of New York Times photos end up in Redux, and Magnum. There are also commercial archives that are specifically for historic materials. And again, those break down between footage and stills as well. It's a pretty long list for historic archives. You'll see some of the same ones we just looked at. So Getty and Pond 5 are here too, because they also have historic materials. And then there's some that are just specifically, like, for example, it's in the name, historic films. They have really great historic materials. And then on the still side, Getty, Alame, Granger, and AP. And again, you're seeing some overlap here between present day and historic. So then there's also news footage. And here is a general list of some of the news footage places. I will say both NBC and BBC are represented through Getty. So you go to Getty Images and you can access those collections. ABC is still mostly in-house. They actually have a brand new website that's really much easier to navigate than their old one. CBS is rep by Veritone, and then CNN and Fox, and they both still have their own archives that you can go directly to. Screen Ocean is kind of a place that has both national news and international news, and they have a really great online search tool. And then AP Archive is also great, and they're in the process of transitioning websites as well. I will say on the news footage, a big note here: some of these places will limit access based on distribution. And this is something that's happened in the last 5 years as these stations have started to realize that, you know, they have exclusive material that they can then exclusively use in their programs. So for example, ABC, if you are working on a project that is in the Disney family, you're going to get better access there. And I also want to note that all of these commercial archives in particular, so all the ones that we've just talked about, have researchers on staff that specifically are working to help you. So you should really take advantage of them. They know the collections far better than any of us ever will. And in many instances, some of these places will do free research. A lot of these news places that we're looking at right now will not do free research, but you can always ask and they'll tell you, and they'll tell you the fees. And it, you know, it just never hurts to ask. So I always encourage, if you are new to this, trying to get the lay of the land, reach out. The research staff is usually very responsive. And then I'll also want to note that, you know, these are relationships just like when you're filming and you're developing relationships with your participants. So, make sure you're nice and give them time, and, try and make sure you're not asking for something that you needed yesterday. They will be super helpful, but also, they're people too. So I always want to remind you to treat them nicely, and then it'll help you in the long run. All right, so now we're going to talk about, and I had a little thing there for that. Now we're going to talk about university and local collections. These are largely photographs, but they often have footage and audio too. And I did note that earlier that a lot of these are going to be offline collections. So these are the ones where you're going to have to go in person, or you're going to have to hire somebody local to go for you. Here are some general collections. The New York Public Library is a really great collection. They do have a digital collection online, but you can also go in person and see much more. University archives, so they will have digital collections. It's not consistent across the universities, but again, their in-person collections are usually much more extensive. For the California, and I know we're Southern Doc Fund, but sometimes you are doing California research. There's a website called Calisphere, which is really great. It basically collects all the university databases into one place, and you can search there. And then other examples are local historical societies, local museums, local libraries, local TV stations, and local newspapers. If you are new to this, or if you're going to an area that you don't necessarily have a lot of familiarity with, local researchers are really great. Most universities will have a list that they can provide you of their local researchers. They are independent of the library and the museum and the archive, but they know the collections really, really well, and are usually really excited to work with you. So that's always an option. It saves the travel costs. And it can be a lot faster because they're going to know just where to look. And I will also add that these universities and these local collections are usually on a slightly different time clock than maybe we are with our deadlines and, fast turnaround. So you just need to expect that this sort of research can take a little bit more time. For example, some local historical societies are all volunteer, and they may only be open 2 or 3 days a week. So they're not going to necessarily quickly respond to your email. Sometimes you have to pick up the phone and call. You often have to make appointments to go in person. So make sure, again, it doesn't hurt to get in touch and find out. And they can have really specific rules. Like, for example, you can't bring in any sort of written, like any sort of technology. Most places at this point are letting you bring in phones and you can take pictures. But every place is still different. Some of them are still, not necessarily using the same sort of technology that we're using on a daily basis. So it's always good to call ahead, because if you go and you're assuming you're going to be able to bring your phone and your computer and everything, you have everything on your computer, and it turns out that you can only bring in pencil and paper, you need to be able to plan ahead for that. Also, with these local collections, the rights are not always held, and we'll get into rights a little later on, but the rights are not always owned by the actual institution that has the physical piece of archival. They may just be the repository for it. They may know who owns it, and they might be able to point you to that person, but they may not. So you also may have to do some of that due diligence and rights research after actually locating the physical photo or a piece of footage. And then I also wanted to make a note about local TV and newspaper stations. You can find really incredible stuff in both of those sorts of collections, but you also need to remember that the staff there are usually working towards getting out the local news, right? So them helping you to find that footage from 1970 is probably going to be lower on their priority list. Not to say that they won't help you, but that barrier of entry exists. And so again, being super nice, being flexible, not having a deadline that needs to be yesterday, you're going to have better luck with these TV stations and local newspapers. I also want to note, and I learned this the hard way, local TV stations do not archive. Okay, so if there is something that aired yesterday, you need to reach out now to try and get it, because they definitely don't save their raw media. They may not even save their cut stories. They kind of save stuff that they think is historically significant. So, for example, in South Carolina, there was a really big flood a few years ago. Everybody saved that. But they didn't necessarily save the like speech of the governor-elect when she, became like she won her election. So it's really, if you see something you want, reach out and try and get access to it quickly, because it may get erased pretty quickly. All right, private collections. Here are some things to think about with private collections. Lots of boxes in a basement. Private collections are also a really, really great source. They're hard because it's stuff that we don't know about. But when you're working on your film, you're meeting a lot of people that have a specific vested interest in the story you're trying to tell. And so they are going to be the ones that are the archivists for that story. So don't forget to ask to see what sorts of stuff they may have saved in their basements. And a big thing to do, I will encourage you, is to offer to look with them, because they may not remember what they saved in those boxes. And it's very easy to be like, oh, I don't have anything, versus like, oh, I'm going to come help you. Let's look through some of these boxes. So think about photographers that were active at that time, video journalists who were active, and then your families. If you're making a film that's somehow local to you or involves your family, ask them what they have. And again, your participants also, they're really invested in the story you're trying to tell and may have some stuff. One thing you can do that's really helpful, especially if it's a still item, so document or a photo, is you can offer to digitize it for them and then provide that digitization to them in exchange to use it in your film. And so, yeah, I found some really incredible stuff in private collections. You get dusty and dirty, but it's some of the coolest stuff that you can find. Okay, so government collections and public domain materials. And I do want to remind you, government created or published before 1928 is public domain. Published before 1928, it has to be published. And here are some presidential library online images. And here are some of the go-to places for this kind of material. So the National Archives, Library of Congress, presidential libraries, Critical Past, which is a great footage website for newsreels. Archive.org is incredible. Prelinger is on archive.org. And then federal government YouTube and social media. With the National Archives and the Library of Congress, I'll add that they have a ton of stuff that is not digitized and not online. And one of the best ways to access that is to hire a local researcher who knows the collection. Both of these collections are pretty well known for being hard to navigate. So having the local researcher for those is really, really key. And you can find really, really great stuff. I will also add that the Universal Newsreels, which is a great collection of newsreel material, was donated to the National Archives, and you can access that. A lot of it's online, but a lot of it is not. And a lot of, let's see. And like I said, Critical Past has a lot of that material too. Pond 5 does too. And Pond 5 also has a section that's like a free public domain search section. So you can go to Pond 5 and find stuff there. Archive.org also has a lot of orphan films, which are films where we don't really know the copyright status, and they let you download them and use them for free as well. So I will add, most of this public domain stuff, there's no licensing, which is great for your budget. But if you were going and you were finding something through the National Archives or the Library of Congress, you're going to have to spend money on duplication, which is getting the master quality. So you need to make sure you budget for that too. All right. Fair use. So we could do an entire workshop on fair use. We're not going to do that. So I'm going to zoom through this. Generally speaking, fair use is when you are commenting, critiquing, or caricaturing material. Montages are a really good way to do fair use because they're kind of showing the zeitgeist and usually setting the scene. And then there's two kind of rules of thumb. You can't get fair use material directly from your copyright holder. So you can't go to Getty, download it, and then claim fair use. That's not allowed. And you will need a lawyer to review it, especially if you're going to get distribution. So it's not like you can just fair use it and not spend money, because at some point you are going to have to spend money on the lawyer fees. But fair use is a wonderful, wonderful thing to take advantage of. And in the courts, recently it's really been upheld. So, it's definitely something to think about. So some places, if you know that you want a fair use, these are some of the places that you can go. Again, you can't get stuff directly from the copyright holder. So YouTube, great place. News aggregator. So if there's something that aired, and sometimes you have to do this because the local news didn't save it anyway, you can go to a news aggregator and they can go back, I think, until roughly 2006. Most news aggregators have been collecting local news and national news. Prelinger on the Internet Archive also has a great TV news archive that you can search. Vanderbilt Film and TV Archive is a national news archive. It goes back until 68. I think it's August 68. The Peabody Collection at UGA also has some really, really great stuff. And then social media, Facebook. I mean, you're going to find lots of great stuff there that you can then claim fair use on. Quick note on newspapers. The last couple of years, especially, newspapers have become increasingly accessible and very searchable too. The microfilm days are over, which is great because researchers spent hours and hours and hours looking for that one article, and now we can just type it in. Newspapers.com is incredible. There's a very low annual fee, but it is 100% worth it. The Library of Congress also has a great newspaper collection. It's a little bit older. It's like pre-1920s. ProQuest Historical. There is a fee for ProQuest. I will say you can go through. New York Public Library actually made ProQuest Historical free for anybody that had a public library card, or you can go to your local library and usually just access it through their computers. And I will also say newspapers are often fair use. And then again, if it's published before 1928, it is definitely public domain. If you want to license a newspaper, it can be very, very expensive. So just keep that in mind if that's something that you're looking at doing. Which brings us to, how much does archive cost? Very simple answer. It's not cheap, but planning ahead can help. So you want to think about what rights you need. So I'm going to do a quick little description of rights. So the standard is all media worldwide in perpetuity, including in-context promo. So if you're like, I don't know, go with that. It'll more or less cover what you're going to need. But generally speaking, you break it into 4 different things. There's the media type, the territory, the length, and the version of promotion that you need. You can do it kind of separate. So like media, you can do streaming only, festival only, broadcast only. If you're going to do theatrical, you'll have to specify that. Territory, you can again break it down if you just want to do US. You can also do it based on length. So if, in perpetuity is forever, you can make it slightly cheaper by doing 3 years. And again, cost is what you're thinking about. Or if you know that you're only making something for streaming, then you can skip the all media side of things. And then promo, like, is this something that you're going to need advertising rights for? In context is basically if something is lifted. So if you've edited your hour-long film and you want to do a 3-minute lift that you're just going to include on your website, or local news wants to do a little segment on the film, that's a lift. So that's usually in context promo. In context promo is a little gray, so sometimes you have to clarify. If you are going to, sometimes it'll cover trailers, not always. So if you're going to cut a trailer, it's usually understood that you're going to have to clear it for advertising. But you should ask each archive because they all have slightly different rules on promo. I will say a la carte is always more. So if you want to just get the licensing done and not have to come back later, go with the all media worldwide in perpetuity, including in context promo, and you'll be in good shape. I'll also add that different projects have different rates. So if you are working on an indie film, or if you're working on a PBS film, or if you're working on a Netflix film, or if you're getting theatrical rights, that is going to change the cost. So you need to, when you're at the licensing point, you need to kind of have a sense of where you're going, just so that you can make sure you're getting clearances correctly. And you also want to ask about licensing costs ahead of time. It is the worst to fall in love with a piece of footage and then find out it's some astronomical amount of money and you just can't afford it and you have to take it out. So it's good to ask in advance. Most of these archives are going to give you a rate card at the top of your research phase. But if they don't, you can ask. And then I want to give you a breakdown of archive cost by type. So these commercial archives that we talked about, Getty, AP, those sorts of places, Pond 5. Pond 5's a little cheaper, but, they can be really expensive. You're going to pay by clip in all instances for the most part, or you're going to pay by a minimum, which is 30 seconds. Most of this is very non-negotiable. That said, I will talk about when you should try and negotiate. News, also very, very expensive. Reporters, if you're going to use a reporter, some places aren't even going to let you use a reporter, but if you are, they will charge you double. And a lot of it will have to be pre-approved. So you will have to send them your clip in context so they can see it, and they will have to approve it. And there will also be a 30-second minimum. University and local archives are cheaper. Again, they are slower on delivery. They likely don't own the rights, but they are cheaper. Government public domain, like we talked about, also cheaper. You'll probably have to pay for some sort of duplication cost. And it might be a slower delivery, but that is kind of what you'll get with government. And then private collections, you kind of set the price on these. So one of the things that I had mentioned up top is that, if you're on a tight budget, one of the things you can do is offer to digitize stuff and give them a copy. And you just basically want to make sure you're offering them a fair and equitable exchange there. And then fair use, again, free, but you will need to do a legal review. Okay, so the more you use, the cheaper it is. So what they call bulk rates. So if you end up using a ton of material, you can get a better deal. So that's one thing to keep in mind. You should always ask for a discount, even though some of these places you're just going to say no. You should always ask. And you should also license all at once, not piecemeal, because it's really annoying for the researcher on the other end. So the person that you're potentially asking for the discount from, it's really not fun for them if you're like, oh, I want to license this. Oh, I want to license this. So make sure you try and do it all at once. It'll give you a better argument for getting that discount. I will say, I don't recommend asking for discounts from tiny collections that are not charging you a ton of money. So maybe save that conversation for these commercial archives and news archives. All right, so what does the budget look like? So you're planning for all of this, or you don't really know where you're going and you're trying to figure it out. These are some of the questions. Do you need a local researcher? Do you need to travel for research? Are you going to be digitizing a ton of stuff? Are you licensing a lot? Well, again, the same question. What percentage of your film is archive footage? What percentage is archive stills? And then these are two kind of rates that you can use to budget. Footage per second rate is 80 a second. That's what the news archives roughly are charging. If you think you're going to use a ton of news footage, budget with that number in mind. If you think you're going to be using a ton of material from the National Archives or some of these cheaper places, maybe bring that per second rate down. Same with stills. It depends on where you're going. And then we're not going to super get into this, but if you're planning in post to do animation or cleanup, make sure you budget for that. That also is expensive. Here is a research and archive licensing budget that I did for a PBS film. We hired local researchers. It ended up being a lot easier. We also had to spend some money on research itself. So a lot of these places, especially the news archives, are going to charge you money for research screeners. So you want to make sure you budget for that. And then I kind of, we knew basically the percentage of how much archive footage we were going to need and stills. And so based on that, I plugged in these numbers. And that was roughly the budget that I came up with. I will say that I like to budget on the higher end, just because it's always easier to redirect money when I start realizing that the archive is not going to be as expensive. But you want to make sure that you're thinking, basically the math is how many seconds of material so if your film is an hour, 60 minutes, do you think 30 minutes are going to be archive footage and then 15 minutes are going to be archive stills? And so that's, then you do the math per second. And that number does get pretty hefty. So, try and be realistic about it. Again, a budget is just a framework, but that's kind of how I think about it. All right, organizing your material. So you want to come up with a naming convention. And so I usually have a project prefix, which in this one is SFD, then a numerical number, and then the type of media. So PIC is picture, headline, doc, illustration, and then you'll see footage and audio. And then I have a abbreviation for the source. So NYPL, New York Public Library, New York Times. And then I'll put an _M if it's master quality. Master quality means it's at least HD, so 1920 by 1080. And then I come up with organizational categories, so tags, and I usually do a 2-level. So in this instance, St. Francis Dam was my top level, and then my second level was everything else listed under there. And then I use those tags to organize my material as I go. And then how do I organize my material? Where is it going? Well, you need an archive log. Google Docs is great. There are other versions you can use, but this is a good free option that everyone can have access to. You basically want to have some key columns, your file name. In this instance, I only had one level of organization, so it was a category, date, short summary. You can also have a longer summary where you put really detailed stuff, but your short summary should be short so that will fit into your edit. Your source reference, and your link. You really want to make sure you save that link if it is not a standard archive. So if you're finding something on YouTube, or if you're finding something on a local historical society website, save the link. And then also save the file name, the original file name, because both of those could disappear and at some point you may need them. And then I break stuff usually into footage, stills, and headlines. You can break stuff out however you want. You really want to build this around what you think is going to help you. But that's generally speaking how I do it. You'll notice the date here, if you can see it, it's in the year, month, day format. That just helps standardize it. If you don't know some of the info, you can put zeros in. So like, say I only knew it was 2008, I would do 2008 0000. And yeah, you want to log everything. Anything you find, log it, because it's very easy to forget where it is from. And you want to rename and log your media as you go. So on the Finder level, this is how I organize it. I have a footage folder, a stills folder. I do sometimes save the original media and just don't rename it as a backup, but I also save it into the footage and stills. And then I rename it so that the naming convention matches the spreadsheet. And then in your edit, you want to also basically copy the organization. And then you have it by number, so exactly as you have it on the Finder. And then I also have a second level organization by category, which is literally by those 2-level organizations that I talked about. And then I'll bring the metadata over. This is a manual process. People have spent hours and days and months trying to figure out how to automate it. We have not managed to it. So this is something that does take some time, but it is super helpful. If you want to skip this process and just bring it in by number and skip the by category, you can do that. If your editor is really great and will work in your log, in your Google Sheets log, that is one simple way to try and simplify this. But If you really want to be buttoned up, you want to bring your metadata over and organize by category as well. Okay, and again, log everything. All right, zooming through all of this, licensing and permissions. So again, this could be a whole workshop unto itself. So I'm going to be very quick on this so we can get to questions, but you need an archive cue sheet. The best way to generate this is a program called Sequence Clip Reporter. It's about $100. It is money well spent. You need to create a spreadsheet that basically lists every piece of third-party material you have, and it'll give you your sequence in and out, your source in and out, and then you'll have to go through and basically go item by item to make sure, A, you have the master, how are you licensing it, and who do you need to reach out to. I usually go vendor by vendor, and I make lists. So I'll make a whole list just of Getty material. I'll make a whole list of NBC material, and then I'll go vendor by vendor. You also can use this spreadsheet because you will need to do a fair use list with your lawyer to review your material, and you're building that from your spreadsheet. Again, we've talked about rights to clear. These are the standard rights. You can also think about materials release versus a license. So if you're, again, private collector, you will get a materials release rather than a license. And then you'll also, when you're going vendor by vendor, you'll be able to see, okay, I'm using 30 seconds. Oh, I'm using 25 seconds. And you want to make sure you're not forgetting about those minimums. Network talent, are you using a reporter? Again, you will put that into your spreadsheet, and then you'll be able to see every single instance that you're using a reporter. And again, like I said, you want to do those bulk orders and be strategic. That's the best way to save money, and ask for discounts. Best efforts, again, this is something I'm going to go through really quickly. Say you can't figure it out. You can't find the copyright holder. You don't know how to clear it. You want to use it. You can sometimes do best efforts. It really depends on your distributor. But it basically shows you did due diligence, and you save that paperwork. So in the event that somebody comes, you know, they see your film and they're like, oh, I'm the copyright holder, you'll be able to say, oh, I was looking for you. Here's my due diligence. And often distributors will take that. The other thing we're zooming through, all of these places are going to want a credit in the end of your film. So you need to make sure you're finding out what those credits are, and building those into your credits. And deliverables. There is a big process when you license third-party material for deliverables that will involve that spreadsheet that we just looked at, and all of your licenses. So you want to make sure you're organizing all of that and being clear about what rights you get from everyone. All right, questions. We made it. So we'll open it up for questions.
Excellent, excellent. Great presentation, great presentation. We'll get started. Hold on one second. Emily, you'll take down your PowerPoint real quick.
Yes.
All right.
Stop share.
Second.
Pause share. Maybe that's what I need to do.
It's all good. It's all good.
Stop
We'll
share.
go ahead and there you go. Well, we got a couple questions here. Let's go into it. We have a question here from Jody. They were like, I don't see a category in Emily's terrific list for sourcing archival film and entertainment footage. What does one need when doing a biopic on an entertainer? Best places to look.
Sure. So movies are actually a great thing to fair use, because usually you are commenting on the film or you're commenting on the actor or entertainer. And so often you can fair use those. I actually find them at the library. You can also just buy the DVD and rip the DVD. But if you want to save a little bit of money, a lot of DVDs are in library collections. You can do interlibrary loan. So I'll just rip the DVD and I'll log it as a piece of material that I'm planning on fair using. If your distributor is not going to let you fair use, and that does happen, there is a whole separate section for licensing that kind of material. As you can probably expect, it's on the more expensive side. So you just have to plan ahead for that.
Cool. Excellent. Next question, Elise. How much do local researchers charge? I guess, what's a ballpark figure or range?
Yeah, so in the budget that you guys saw, I had $400 a day. It varies, like all fees. So you just need to ask them. They usually will give you an hourly rate. And if it's too high, you can always say, well, I'm an indie project. How flexible can you be? But I would say rule of thumb, 400 a day.
Right, right. And how I do it, I've always negotiated, so you never know, always got to ask. Next question, I guess it was the same person. They got fair use and Instagram. I guess they got a question about, can you actually use, I guess, maybe some Instagram post as fair
Yeah,
use as well?
100%. Definitely. And you
That's
have to
cool.
get it approved by your lawyer, but
Right,
in all
right.
likelihood, yes.
Cool, cool. Next one, anonymous. In terms of asking for discounts, does it help if you have a fiscal sponsor to offer a tax write-off for that amount?
Maybe with a private collector, potentially. These more commercial archives are not gonna, they'll maybe
Right.
give you, if it's a nonprofit, your fiscal sponsor is a nonprofit and they're paying for it,
Right,
they can potentially do tax exempt, but I don't think they'll do a write-off.
right. I know I had one a fiscal sponsor, and I think the museum was charging like $100 a photo, but with my fiscal sponsor, I was able to get it down to $10 a photo.
Mhm.
So it kind of
Well,
helped with
and
that a little bit.
that's a good
Yeah,
point. A lot of, especially universities, will have different pay fees
right,
based on who your distributor is. So
right.
if you are going to PBS, if you're an indie project, they're going to charge you a lower rate than if you're Netflix.
Exactly, exactly. Cool, cool. Another question from Donnie Betts. Can you explain if I use the reporter?
Sure. Yeah. So if you want to license a reporter from a network, so let's say Tom Brokaw from NBC, they basically charge, I think their regular B-roll rate is like 82 a second. Their reporter rate is like 123 a second.
Mhm.
And so they just charge it at a higher rate, and then they have to review it. And actually with Tom Brokaw, since he's still living, his team also reviews it. So you're going to have NBC Archive review it, and you're going to have Tom Brokaw's team review it. So it's just a longer process. They don't want you to just cut him up. So if you were taking his words out of context or changing the meaning of what he's saying, they're not going to approve that. So you just have to plan ahead and edit with that in mind. Reporters are also things that you can, especially if you're not getting it directly from the archive, fair use. And so you'll often see reporter montages where, you have 3 or 4 different voices in a
Mhm.
montage. That's a good fair use example. So that's always something to consider too.
Cool, cool. Donnie had another question right after that. Is body cam used on YouTube fair use?
So body cam is actually, if it's from a police department, it's probably public domain.
Mhm.
Some of these more local agencies sometimes are not actually public domain, so you need to double check. But if it's from a police station, likelihood is it's public domain, which means you can use it. If it's definitely part of a court, like if it's used in a court proceeding, it's definitely public domain. If it's random body cam you pull off of YouTube that's some guy doing XYZ, then no, like
Gotcha.
that has copyright. And so you'd have to either fair use it reputably or license it.
Cool. Um, Clara, her question, she has two actually. What does a rights search look like? And then the second one is, what does the digitization process usually look like if you're working with a local/regional archive?
Sure. So if you're doing a rights search, you basically are just kind of following the breadcrumbs. So sometimes there'll be a stamp on the corner of the picture. Sometimes it's in somebody's private papers, and so it's assumed that they're the photographer. You basically just have to follow those breadcrumbs. There is a copyright website, the US copyright database. I'd have to Google it. And you can go in there and you can actually search, and they are searching to see if somebody actually did copyright their materials. Sometimes people don't, but it's hard to prove something that doesn't exist. So if you're able to go and you figure out who the photographer is, and you're pretty sure that's who it is, and they're not showing up in the copyright search, that would then be what you call a best efforts. But you have to go through that due diligence of looking, and often you will find descendants. So, the photographer's daughter, and then they can sign the license or the materials release for you. And you have evidence that you're pretty sure that, they own it. Digitizing. So yeah, archives, especially local archives, are all over the map. Sometimes they'll actually let you bring in a scanner and you can just scan the stuff yourself. Sometimes they will charge you a separate fee. It can range from $5 to free to $25. Some places are really technologically advanced and they can scan something at like 1200 DPI if you want it. Some places are not that familiar. So you just kind of have to feel it out,
Right.
and figure out what the options are.
Cool. Elise, they had another question here.
Materials.
Material release form. You have any info on that, or?
Yeah, I kind of zoomed through that. So thanks for asking. So if you are getting, like I said, a private collection or somebody that's not necessarily an archive that has gone through a licensing process, it's very similar to an appearance release. It's basically a one sheet, and you can write in at the top the material that you're getting permission for. And it's usually very short language that just says they are the copyright holder. They give you permission to use it in all media here, now known or whoever, blah, blah, blah. They give you permission for using it in ads and promo. They give you permission to use it forever within the body of your film. But it's usually just a one-page document. And you can find those very easily. If you're working with a lawyer, they will have one.
Right.
But it's basically like an appearance release, but for a piece of material.
Gotcha. I know we have an anonymous attendee here, and I know you said earlier, we won't be discussing music, but any music related questions you have, come to our annual convening. We're going to have an excellent panel with a music supervisor and a composer talking about that exact thing, about music copyrights, working with record labels. So come to the convening. We have an excellent music for documentaries panel for that. But you definitely want to talk to a music supervisor for that. It's a totally separate thing than archival, but definitely check out the convening. Elise with another question. She has Shutterstock Pixels. I guess those are
Those
sourcing
are both
sites.
archives. Those are, Shutterstock is great. Pexels I've become a little bit more familiar with from some other projects I've worked on, but those are more the commercial B-roll kind of archives.
Right.
And you just want to make sure that when you license from these places that you're getting a piece of license, a license that says what rights you have.
Right. Lisa, her question: does the length of a doc affect the cost of archival materials?
Not usually, no.
Gotcha. Evo, should the lawyer and legal review be provided by the production?
So you will hire a lawyer when you are getting basically to fine cut, and they will review your film and they'll review it for what's in the film itself, so the content, but they'll also review it for third-party materials. Sometimes you have to hire separate lawyers. Sometimes there's a lawyer just for third-party archive and fair use, and then sometimes there's just a lawyer for content. And then you will have to provide a spreadsheet for them to review and a cut of the film. So you're hiring them and then they do the legal review for you.
Cool. Let me go back to that question about Black musician. He said he wasn't talking about audio. My fault. I guess they were related to images and photos and stuff. I don't think you really have to go through the record labels for those, right? You go through the photographers, right? For that one.
It depends on who owns the photo. So if
Gotcha.
the photo is owned by a label, you can license a photo through a label.
Okay.
And that depends. It really depends. Sometimes the photographer would negotiate that they held on to their copyright.
Right.
Usually photographers prefer to do that. But if they are hired by the label, the label may own the material.
Cool. Let me see here. Emily, is there a standard rate for local researchers? I think you already answered with 400, right? It's kind of like
around
standard.
400 a day. Yeah,
400 a day is standard. Francis, an extension on the entertainment questions. Can you fair use a TV show as well?
Yeah, you can basically fair use anything you want as long as you're using it in an arguably fair use way. So your lawyer has to review it and say, yes, this is fair use. TV show, definitely.
Gotcha, gotcha. Newspapers since 1928 have to get permission?
So they're not public domain, like you picked up on. It depends on how you're using it. So if you're using it in a fair use way, then you can fair use it. Most filmmakers use newspapers in fair use ways because you're using it to show or demonstrate or comment on something. So if you're doing that, and you're really kind of using it to speak to the zeitgeist of the times, newspapers are an example of cultural awareness. So if you're using it in that way, if you're commenting specifically on the fact that an article was written, you are actually commenting on the fact that it exists. So that is a fair use argument. But if you are using it for entertainment or visuals or whatever, that's not going to be fair use. And in those instances, you'll have to license it. And that's when, again, newspapers are expensive. So you want to try and edit newspapers in a way that is either it's a public domain paper or you're editing in a way that's fair use.
Gotcha, gotcha. Madeline, how do you avoid a chicken and egg situation when it comes to edit/budget? How do you know how much material to budget for when you're early in post-production?
So that again goes back to some of those questions. How much archive are you going to use in your film? If you know that you're going to use a ton, then you need to make sure you budget for a lot. If you know that you don't have a large budget, but you want to be really thoughtful, you're asking in advance how much stuff costs. So don't bring in that really expensive stuff that you know you can't afford. If you don't give it to your editor, they don't know that they don't have it. And so you just want to be really cautious. You can also do a cost estimate. So if you get to a point in your cut and you're like, I need to know how much this is going to cost, you can do the licensing preparation. You can make that spreadsheet, the Q sheet, the archive Q sheet, and you can kind of estimate how much things are going to cost and then, make changes from there.
Gotcha. Can one fair use a TED Talk?
You can fair use anything as long as you're using it in a fair use way. So a TED Talk, yeah, if it's being used in a fair use way, for sure.
Cool, cool. We only got time for a few more questions here. Emily, are your services available for hire? Someone wants to hire you.
Always. I think everyone, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Emily, if you want to share your contact info, if people are wanting to hire you for your services, she'll definitely share that with you guys for sure. Let me see here, Patrick. I'm working with a local museum. Do I need to find licenses for all the newspapers and photos on display? What if I'm using my own footage of that item on display at the museum?
Good question. So arguably, and this is a stretch, but this is how it goes. Arguably, if you're filming it, you probably don't need to clear it because you can claim fair use. If you were doing it in a way that is very like making it really central to your shot and you're not actually commenting on the item and it's just visuals, some lawyers may want you to license that. It depends on comfort level. I would say personally, if you're filming it, and you're, commenting on it and it's being used in a way that you're making a point about the material, you're probably fine with fair use.
Cool, cool. Christopher, are there special considerations for using recordings of stage performances?
Yeah, so good question. Actors are, especially in stage performances, are members of guilds. So there may be some guild clearances there that you'll have to do. So again, that would be something that you would probably ask the person that filmed it. They may know what guild clearances you need to do, but you would be doing those separately from licensing the actual material.
Gotcha. Lucretia, how do you go about sourcing or asking permission to use archival footage from a local news outlet that is no longer broadcasting?
That can be really hard because if they're no longer broadcasting, there may be no office anymore. If the local university did a good job, they may have collected that stuff and then it may be in a university. But if they're no longer broadcasting, I would find a news journalist that maybe worked there and see if the entity itself, it may have been bought by somebody and then they went out of business. So you have to do that. Again, you have to do that breadcrumb search and try and figure out who owned the copyright last and if that entity exists or not. And if you can't figure it out, then that's your best efforts. You put that, you put your research together and claim best efforts.
Right. Well, everyone, Emily, she's on a strict timetable today. I know we didn't get through everyone's question, but Emily, she's put her email on here. Definitely reach out to her if you're one of those folks that didn't get your question answered. She'll definitely get back to you. We're also going to send this this recording out to you guys with the PowerPoint presentation. So definitely use it. And also for folks out there on this call, if you are part of our fiscal sponsorship program, sign up. Emily is a mentor for the next 7 months for you guys. So if you have received a grant from us or you're part of our fiscal sponsorship program, hey, sign up. You see the wealth of knowledge that she has. Sign up. You have the email link to sign up in your email inbox. So sign up for a one-on-one session with her. And also, if people out there interested in fiscal sponsorship, reach out to me and we can talk about you being a part of what we have going on here. As you see, we have high quality makers a part of this thing and with the wealth of knowledge. But I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. Like we were telling you earlier, we will be sending this presentation out to you in the next day or so. But also we have another roundtable coming up next month, March 27th from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m., which will be our next roundtable, Educational Distribution, with filmmaker John Beater. John will share his knowledge on how he successfully distributed his film for educational purposes, resulting in over 60 screenings worldwide. So definitely sign up for that for our next roundtable next month. Also, just a reminder, our annual Southern Documentary Convening is May 19th through the 21st, downtown Durham. Passes are on sale now. Definitely take advantage of the early bird special, which ends March 8th. So get your passes today. Again, thanks everyone. Thank you again, Emily. This was a great roundtable. I'm definitely going to go back and look at it, and I'm going to hit you up for some questions as well. So cool. Excellent. All right, everyone. You enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you again next month, March 27th. Y'all have a good one.